Welcome to the Internet of Things Equation, a podcast when I talk about the Internet of Things domain both from the technical and business perspectives. I'm Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer. My today's guest travel around the globe to help make cities smarter and enable data economy. He's the CEO of Gaia-x and CEO of FIWARE. Ulrich Ahle, thank you so much for finding time to meet with me today.
Yeah, Lukas, you're welcome.
You made an impressive impact on smart cities landscape and data economy in general. Could you briefly summarize history for the listeners?
Yeah, we created the FIWARE Foundation 7 years ago. It had already a history in the so-called Future Internet public-private partnership of the European Commission with a lot of European organizations, and to bring all the investment which was made in the first 5 years, and that are more than 500 million euro, into a sustainable future. The FIWARE Foundation was created 7 years ago, end of 2016, and I had the honor to create the FIWARE Foundation together with my colleagues and with 4 companies, which were at that time Atos, then Orange from France, Telefonica from Spain, and Engineering Informatica from Italy. And in the meantime, FIWARE is the globally leading open source technology for smart cities. But we are not only providing as an ecosystem open source software building blocks, but we are also providing standard interfaces, so standard APIs and standard data models. And with this, not only open source, but an open ecosystem. And as I said, in the meantime, it's globally leading in the domain of smart cities. More than 350 cities in over 30 countries around the world are deploying their digitization based on FIWARE technology.
So we will speak about FIWARE in a second, but just recently you became the Chief Executive Officer of Gaia-x. And
yeah, this is true. And Gaia-x was created a bit more than 3 years ago with the ambition to create a digital ecosystem based on European values. So to enable the creation of what we call data spaces based on a federated cloud infrastructure. And the main target here is to allow the creators of data to trustfully share their data and to be able to benefit from the value of the data which have been produced by them. And Gaia-x in this case is headquartered in Brussels. I was just in Brussels 2 days this week, and also an organization, a member-driven organization, which was created by 11 French and 11 German companies 3 years ago, and has in the meantime more than 360 members. Again, very, very international.
so building trusted decentralized ecosystem, that's a huge task. And could you briefly explain the role of open source and open standards in achieving that goal?
Yeah, there are 2 things, and you explained it very well. Open source on the one side, that we have software technology which can be used by everyone for free forever. And here we are providing FIWARE, Gaia-x, and also several other partners who are active in the creation of interoperable data spaces. We are providing open source software building blocks which are necessary to create such data spaces and underlying digital platforms. And on the other hand, it is important to create replicable and interoperable solutions. And for this, we need standard architectures, standard APIs, standard data models. And this enables the creation of open solutions. So open source on the one side and open standards on the other hand. And these open standards can also be implemented by commercial software to enable them and to enable the collaboration between open source based solutions and commercial solutions. So open standards are as important as the underlying open source technology.
Yeah, I think that's great way to approach that. And actually, I remember like a few years ago, open source was not really that visible in the enterprise arena, right? But right now, based what you're doing and based what other companies are doing, like we see the true potential of open source and open standards to bring value to the users, right? To the end users.
Yeah, but for example, if you look at operating systems, if you look at Linux, this is in the meantime really market standard. But on the application level, on the data spaces level, there are differences in the different application domains. For example, in the public domain, in a lot of countries, open source based solutions are the requirement. So you have no chance to create projects with the end customers if you're not providing open source solutions. In the, let's say, in the chemical industry or in the manufacturing industry as such, it is the opposite. Here, you still need to convince the responsible people on the end user, on the customer side, that it is possible also with open source to support mission critical processes within their organizations and within their companies. So it is a different maturity level of open source adoption in the different verticals and industries.
Yeah, you're totally right. But I think that we are getting there, right? As you said, those
Yeah.
are different maturity levels. But hopefully, everyone will see the potential of doing this in open way. So going back to the Internet of Things, which is the my domain, the IoT gathers data from our surroundings, but we need to extract knowledge from obtained information, and we need to properly manage that information in the first place. You mentioned the concept of data spaces. Could you explain it in a bit more details?
Yeah, during the last years, we have been working on creating digital platforms. Yeah, for example, a smart city platform, as we are talking here in the domain of smart cities. And these digital platforms are characterized by having known sources of data. So there are well-defined sensors which are connected to a platform, IT systems, cameras, drones, public services like weather services. So all already known sources of data, and we have already known users of data. Yeah, the citizens, the public municipality, the utilities company within a city. So all are known. They have their user rights, they have their access rights, and so on. And now we are getting one level further into the domain of data spaces. With digital platforms, we are connecting few sources with a few users. And on the side of the data spaces, we are connecting many, many sources and many users and providing functionality to even allow data sources or data providers or data users, which were not known before, to automatically be identified, to connect to the platform, and either to provide or to use this data. And at the same time, to enable what we call data sovereignty, what I mentioned before, that the creator of a set of data is able to determine and to technically enforce what someone who gets access to his or her data via a data space is allowed and technically able to do with his data.
So you mentioned a few topics during your answer, and I would like to dive a bit deeper into them because they are extremely important. So one of the main challenges of the Internet of Things is fragmentation, right? We've got those data silos, we've got different verticals, and you mentioned that data spaces enable cooperation and sharing data between verticals to fully utilize that information. Could you give us some insights of how that is even possible?
Yeah, here I need to provide first a bit of background. As you know, I took over the lead of the Gaia-x Association, and I'm still leading the FIWARE Foundation. And these two organizations, together with two additional ones, one is the International Data Spaces Association, where I'm also a member of the board and a founding member, and the Big Data Value Association. These four associations, all member-driven associations, created the Data Spaces Business Alliance 2 years ago as simply a collaboration of these four organizations with a target to create a joint architecture, with a target to be able to talk with one voice to the market. And one of the main results of these activities is a so-called technical convergence. So a common architecture to create these data spaces. And this architecture is filled with different building blocks, technical building blocks for connectivity, for trust and data sovereignty, for data monetization, and several building blocks for the governance. So how to organize such a data space, how to implement business models based on a data space. And our ambition is, in collaboration with the European Commission, to provide this as a reference architecture for data spaces which are actually in creation in different domains. So there are projects ongoing to create data spaces in manufacturing, in energy, in mobility, in smart cities, in agriculture, and so on. And our ambition is that 80% of the before mentioned building blocks are domain agnostic and are used in the same way in a mobility data space as it is in an energy data space or in a smart city data space. Because imagine there will be in the future data spaces, let's say a data space for a smart city, which needs to work together with a smart energy and a smart mobility data space, and they wouldn't be interoperable. In that case, we would have done clearly a mistake. And therefore, it is very important to understand these concepts of the building blocks, to adopt the building blocks as an enabler for interoperability between different data spaces in different domains. And then there are remaining 20% of required building blocks, which might be and will be domain specific, because there are specific requirements in each of the different verticals. But this underlying 80% shall be the enabler for the interoperability of data spaces in different domains.
Yeah, I think that is very smart design, especially according to what you said, that there is no way to predict future users and future verticals, right? Because the smart cities ecosystem is growing and we are adding additional layers on top of it in a way. So designing data spaces in a way that they can be used with unknown today data sources and by unknown customers, which is extremely important, right? Because the data has no value if no one is using it. So designing a concept that can be used by unknown users to generate value that we even cannot predict today, I think that really is what differentiates this approach and provides value for the future, right?
Yeah. And this is also very important to understand that digital platforms, about which I've been talking before, and now also data spaces, are a kind of prerequisite to create smart solutions, to create value for citizens living in a city, for farmers working on a farm. But we need also additional instruments to create this value. Data spaces as such are providing data. And then we need additional services. And here, AI, generative AI, big data analytics are coming into the place to use this data and to create intelligent solutions. So to give you one example, on which we are also working in the little village where I'm living close to Paderborn. Here we are collecting sensor data, enhancing this sensor data by meteorological models, so weather forecast, by hydrological models, and using this data based on artificial intelligence to create a flood pre-warning system for the citizens. So not only to inform them, there's a sensor measuring there is now 2 meters of water in your river, but to provide a pre-warning within the next 5 hours, you will expect 20 centimeters of water in your street. So better be prepared. And this is a very simple example of how data provided on a data space can be used using artificial intelligence to create additional services and additional values. And therefore, one of the 4 before mentioned partners, the Big Data Value Association, and the name stands for itself, is a very important partner because their focus is to create value out of data.
Yeah, and I love your example because it shows that you think from the ecosystem perspective, right? And in my opinion, this is what really differentiates the Internet of Things from one-to-one connectivity between devices. That Internet of Things is all about creating those ecosystems that generate outcomes to the users. And those users might be individuals, might be companies, right? But we are thinking from the ecosystem perspective.
Yeah,
So
and this is a very important basic principle for our work, to always start from the end user requirements. What are the challenges on the end user, on the customer side? And then to check which technologies are there or need to be developed to answer to these challenges and to fulfill end user requirements. Just developing technology for the sake of technology doesn't create any value.
That is totally right. So speaking about challenges, besides your new role at Gaia-x, you're also the CEO of FIWARE. And FIWARE is the official standard for small city data management in India. Korea is building small cities supercluster leveraging that framework. Like those are outstanding achievements. Could you elaborate on them?
Yeah, I think we still have a bit time. Let me tell you the story of India. And I explained before FIWARE that it's not only open source, but also open standards. So for example, a standard interface for data management, which is in the meantime a formal European standard, standardized by ETSI. And I have to start the story differently. When Prime Minister Modi in India was elected for the first time back in 2014, so 9 years ago, he quite soon started a program which is known as the 100 Smart Cities program in India. 1 year later, the cabinet approved a budget of roughly 13 billion US dollar, so not million, but billion. And the big consulting companies of this world came, supported the cities in creating their smart city strategy, because the cities first had to do a strategy, then brought first tenders to the market, supported the implementation of first solutions. And roughly 4 years ago, the responsible minister, the Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, identified that each city has built its own silo, that there are only limited synergy potentials between the different cities, and that the wheel has been reinvented several times using public funding. And he said this needs to change. And I was lucky to be at the right place at the right moment. So I was invited by the World Bank to a smart city conference in New Delhi. Was on a panel which was moderated by the Secretary of State, who is responsible operationally for this 100 Smart Cities program. And after he saw my presentation and heard my interventions, he came to me after the panel and said, we need to talk. And I had a meeting the same night in the ministry. And we then started as FIWARE to support the India Institute of Science, which worked together with the ministry in first creating a standard reference architecture for Indian smart cities. And then together with 2 FIWARE members, we supported the Institute in implementing this architecture using open source technology, using FIWARE standard interfaces, using FIWARE data models. And then 2 years ago, the Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, together with the Technology Minister, announced this platform as the new standard smart city platform for India. Not with the intention to bring it to the 100 cities which have invested already, but for the remaining 4,200 cities in India. And India is a large country. It's much larger than the whole of Europe. And then half a year later, the Bureau of Indian Standards even standardized this API. It is called Next Generation Service Interface, NGSI, as a formal standard for the data management in Indian cities. So, and this is a story which is being replicated. You mentioned Korea, and there are several other countries also outside of Europe which are going this way. And the first country within Europe is a little country in Europe. It's Slovenia. And they are requesting their cities, if they would like to use public funding for their digitization, they have to use the standard APIs and they have to use the standard data models, simply to enable interoperability and to enable replicability between the different cities, that it is not necessary to reinvent the wheel, but to enable reusability.
Yeah, and to create that ecosystem, like that internet of cities, so to speak.
Yeah. And talking about the ecosystem regarding this standard data models, we started this initiative in the meantime 7 years ago at the Smart City Expo World Congress in Barcelona. At that time, it was called the Frontrunner Smart Cities Initiative. 8 European cities, plus La Plata from Argentina and Montevideo from Uruguay, they agreed, let's work on the definition of standard and commonly used data models. And in the meantime, we have more than 1,000 of these standardized data models, not only in the smart city domain, but also in mobility, in energy, and so on. And it is managed by the FIWARE organization, but also by the Open and Agile Smart Cities organization, OASC, by TM Forum, and also the India Institute of Science, which created an organization which is called IUDX, the India Urban Data Exchange organization. Also, they joined the management of this organization. So they are using the already defined data models, but they are also bringing in their requirements and enhancing the data models that in those cases where already existing data models don't fit to their demands, that they are able to bring this in as requirement. And then we have a quite lean process to analyze the requirements and to come up with new data models, which are then integrated to this catalog.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned data spaces and the data economy, and one of the benefits of data spaces and the standardized APIs is that we do not reinvent the wheel all over the time, right? Which is like is a huge gain, but at the same time, this is like the real challenge for the initiatives, that they tend to reinvent the wheel. What are other benefits of data economy that this approach that you just described bring, both for the governments, organizations, and maybe for the end users as well?
Yeah, they are, beside the fact that this open source building blocks, APIs, data models are all open source. So they are all available on GitHub for everyone for free forever. It is important, and this is always to be analyzed when talking about open source, that in the case of FIWARE, there is a large global developers ecosystem behind it. So it's not just 1, 2, 3 companies which are behind this open source technology. In FIWARE, we are talking about 8,000 developers around the world, which are contributing to the maintenance, to the further development of this technology, or which are using the building blocks to create digital platforms, solutions, data spaces. Second, there is a large ecosystem of companies, being global corporates, but also small and mid-sized companies, startups, innovative startups, which are using this open source building blocks, putting them together and creating open source based solutions for their customers. And in this combination, it is possible to provide the lowest cost of ownership to the users of IT solutions. And finally, and this for some of the end users is even more important, by using not only open source, but especially open standards, standard APIs, standard data models, the so-called vendor lock-in effect is dramatically reduced. It is difficult to avoid it completely because vendors build up process know-how of their customers, and with this already there is a certain lock-in, but there is definitely no lock-in by the software, and this is also a very, very important benefit for an approach like we are driving.
Yeah, I think that is great initiative. And as you said, like there is always some kind of locking, because even if you decide to use, let's say, Python, then that locks you into the Python ecosystem, so to speak, right? But the know-how, the universal data structures, universal APIs, all of that gives you the opportunity to easily change the underlying implementation if needed. So I think this is really foundation for creating that ecosystem and to manage that fragmentation of Internet of Things, which is one of the reasons I believe why the Internet of Things is not fully adopted, because it is still very, very fragmented. And what you're doing is actually you're helping to even improve the Internet of Things as such, right? By implementing it.
Yeah.
So that's great. How can our listeners follow you to stay up to date with your impact on the digital world? What's the best way to see what you're doing and how you're changing the way that we think about smart cities and smart infrastructure?
Yeah, one way definitely is simply to look for our newsletter on the FIWARE side, on the Gaia-x side, to check the different social media channels on LinkedIn, on Facebook, where we are continuously publishing news. Connect to myself on LinkedIn, and if organizations would like to get stronger involved, both organizations, FIWARE as well as Gaia-x, are member-driven organizations, so you can also become member. Or another option is simply to visit our events. And I mentioned before that FIWARE and Gaia-x joined forces together with BDVA and the International Data Spaces Organization. And together we are organizing the Data Spaces Symposium. It will be a big event, mid of March next year, close to Frankfurt in the city of Darmstadt, so very close to the Frankfurt airport. And I would be happy to welcome some of you who are viewing here this video or listening to the post there at our Data Spaces Symposium next year.
Yeah, I'm sure that lots of people will attend, because that's the great way to learn and to prepare for the future, right? Both if you're the vendor or just starting in this space. So I would like to thank you very much for finding time to meet with me. I know that you're extremely busy person, but thank you for sharing your insights, your expertise about the smart cities, data economy, and other essential topics. So I wish you all the best on your new journey as the CEO of Gaia-x, and hopefully we will have opportunity to talk together in the future.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure, and have a nice day.
Thank you for listening. Go to thefingers.com to find more materials about the Internet of Things domain. My name is Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer.